Welcome to The Explainer. We talk a lot about decarbonizing cars and power plants, but what about the massive ships, planes, and trucks that move literally everything we buy? Today, we're diving into a really clever framework designed to get global logistics on a green track, and fast.
Just look at it. The global freight sector is the absolute backbone of our modern economy. It's this nonstop, complex dance of ships, planes, and trucks that keeps the world running.
And it's a big but, this incredible system comes with a pretty hefty environmental price tag. We're talking about roughly 10% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. And here's the kicker, if we don't do something big, that number is actually projected to go up.
So what's the holdup? Why is this sector considered so hard to abate, as they say? Well, according to the folks at the Smart Freight Center, it really just comes down to two massive roadblocks that have been stalling progress for years.
Okay, let's really get into this. First, you've got the sky-high costs. Imagine you run a trucking company. You can't just start using expensive biofuel when all your competitors are using cheap diesel. You'd lose every contract. And second, the supply chains themselves are just a tangled mess of different companies and subcontractors. It's almost impossible to say, okay, this specific green investment paid for that specific package.
So to get around these problems, the industry needed a totally new way of thinking about this. A real breakthrough idea that could, get this, separate the physical movement of a box from the environmental benefit of moving it cleanly.
And the solution is actually built on a concept that's been around for a while in other industries. It's called a chain of custody system. The easiest way to think about it is like a passport for a product. It doesn't just track where the product goes, it tracks all its important info, its attributes, like its carbon footprint, every single step of the way.
And that brings us to the core engine that makes this whole thing run, a system called Book and Claim. This is the magic trick. It lets you take the greenness, that environmental attribute, of something like a gallon of biofuel and separate it digitally from the physical fuel itself. You're basically creating a digital certificate for that environmental benefit.
So here's the aha moment. A truck over in Rotterdam can fill up with regular old diesel for its delivery. At the very same time, a company in the US can buy the certified emission reduction, the green attribute, from some biofuel that was made in Singapore, and then digitally apply that benefit to the truck in Rotterdam. The green fuel and the truck don't even have to be on the same continent.
Okay, this next part is super important, so let's be crystal clear. If Book and Claim is the accounting system, the how, then the thing it creates, the actual product you can buy and sell, is called a Low Emissions Transport Service, or LETS for short. A LETS is the real deal tradable unit. Think of it as a certificate that proves you paid for a certain amount of green transportation. This is the thing companies will actually trade.
Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Hang on, it sounds a lot like a carbon credit, right? And that is a great question. They might seem similar on the surface, but there is an absolutely crucial difference in where your money actually goes. And that key difference boils down to one word: insetting versus offsetting. A carbon credit is for offsetting. You're paying for an unrelated project, like planting trees somewhere else, to compensate for your emissions. But a LETS is all about insetting. Your investment goes directly back into the freight industry to help clean up the very system you're using. The money stays within the value chain to fix the problem at its source.
All right, so that's the theory, but how does this all actually work in the messy, real world of logistics? Let's take a look at the key players and how they all fit together. For this whole system to work, you basically need four main players to get on the same page. You've got the shipper. That's the company whose stuff is being moved. The logistics service provider, or LSP, who's like the travel agent for the cargo. The carrier, who actually owns and operates the trucks or ships. And finally, the solution provider, the company making the green fuel or technology.
Now, a LETS can be created in a couple ways. There's direct generation. That's when a carrier, say, puts biofuel in their own truck, and then they create or book the LETS. But the really flexible one is indirect generation. This is where an LSP can buy just the green attributes from a fuel maker and create a LETS. And this indirect route is what lets the investment flow to wherever it can make the biggest difference.
And honestly, this flexibility is what makes the whole system so powerful. It means a company can invest in making shipping greener even if the only available biofuel is for trucks halfway around the world. It completely smashes the geographical barriers that have slowed down progress for so long.
So let's walk through a real-world example. An LSP buys the certified green attributes from a sustainable jet fuel producer. They take those attributes and book them as an LTES in a digital registry. Then they sell that LTES to their customer, say a big electronics company. And that company can then claim the LTES to report lower emissions for their air freight. And this all happens without a single drop of that physical biofuel ever needing to be in that specific plane. Pretty cool, right?
So, let's zoom out for a second. What's the big takeaway here? Why is everyone getting so excited about this framework? What makes it a potential game changer for the entire industry?
At the end of the day, it all comes back to solving those two big problems we started with: cost and complexity. What this framework really does is create a standardized market, a clear set of rules so that everyone in the supply chain can finally work together. It connects the companies that have the money and want to go green with the innovators who are actually creating the solutions.
Okay, so let's recap the essentials. The problem, high costs, and messy supply chains. The mechanism to fix it, book and claim, which separates the green attribute from the physical stuff. This creates the product, a tradable unit called a LETS, and the overall impact, it's insetting, which drives money directly back into the freight sector to fund its own green transition.
So this is a really powerful way to solve the investment puzzle. But by fixing the accounting problem, it puts a huge spotlight on the next major challenge. Now that there's a clear way to pay for it, the race is officially on to produce enough green fuels and technology to power a truly zero-emission global supply chain.